Thanks everyone for joining. Congratulations on finding the one technology panel at South by Southwest that's not about AI. This is going to be more of a human story, a story of connection, a story of empathy, a story of people reaching out to their communities, and we're going to share with you the story of Welcome Connect and Welcome US, and we'll tell you more about what that is. Just a quick show of hands, who knows what Welcome.us is? Okay, about half. So we're going to explain it. Don't worry, don't panic. That'll be part of the story. So I want to begin by just introducing my esteemed panelists and good friends. First of all, Nazanin Ash, who in the world of policy and government is almost like Beyonce. She just goes by Naz, and everyone knows who that is. She is the CEO of Welcome US, but she has many years of experience in policy across a spectrum of different government agencies. And so welcome, Naz.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm so excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit more about you.
I'm privileged to lead this amazing organization, Welcome.us. I came to this role from 5.5 years leading global policy and advocacy at the International Rescue Committee, and before that, a decade at the Department of State and USAID, always working in the arenas of advancing human rights and humanitarian response, and working on policy reforms to make US government and humanitarian response interventions more responsive to the challenges that we're facing today in trends in global displacement. And before that, I worked for a few years internationally in places like Eastern and Western Africa and the Middle East.
Wow, okay. And I want to introduce Bryce Luchterhand next. Bryce is not just a farmer, I have learned through getting to know him very well. He is, if you remember The Most Interesting Man in the World on the commercials for Dos Equis, that is our guy, Bryce, who has had a very broad range of experiences from community organizing to teaching on a Navajo reservation. So Bryce, welcome. Tell us a little bit more.
We started out with our career. Max is my wife and is sitting here in the audience. We got married in August of 1970, moved out to the Navajo reservation, came back, was a milk cows for 15 years, did a stint in county government, was appointed by President Clinton to run the Farmers Home Administration in the state of Wisconsin. Later became what's called U.S. Rural Development. And then ran the governor's northern office in Wisconsin for 8 years, and then worked for a couple of senators. Herb Kohl retired, and then Tammy Baldwin retired, and then I retired.
Sort of,
exactly.
Welcome, Bryce and Naz. My name's Jim Lesser. I'm the Chief Brand Officer at ServiceNow, which is a technology platform, and you'll learn a little bit more about what that is. But at ServiceNow, we are a technology company that works with many of the world's biggest companies, but we're driven to try to make the world work better for everyone. It's our mission, it's our purpose, it's our drive, and this wonderful example of our partnership with Welcome US is one of many. So we wanted to highlight it and talk more about the story of really public sector and private sector coming together to create something that couldn't be done by either one of them on their own. So let's get started with just a question, Naz, for you, for the half of the audience who doesn't know what Welcome Connect is. Let's lay out what is Welcome Connect.
All right, perfect. So Jim is very right. Our official name is Welcome.us. I often refer to it as Welcome.us, in part because it is as much about us and what we choose to do as Americans as it is about the people that we're privileged to welcome. And you'll hear more about what that means over the course of the panel. We're an organization that mobilizes and empowers American communities and the American private and civic sector to help welcome and resettle refugees and people in need of safety and opportunity here in the United States. We often describe ourselves as working at the intersection of global crises and what Americans and American institutions wish they could do about it. And it's a model that's proven extraordinarily effective in solving some of the global displacement challenges that we're facing today, which brings me to Welcome Connect. We had an enormous need after Russia invaded Ukraine to mobilize Americans to help welcome and resettle Ukrainians in need of safety in the United States. We worked with government partners to help design a policy innovation that would allow Americans to directly sponsor Ukrainians in need of safety. It meant that Ukrainians could come to safety in the United States, but only if they had an American sponsor here who would be their bridge to safety. And we started out really just mobilizing and informing Americans of the opportunity to sponsor. We anticipated that many of the people who would step up to sponsor would be Ukrainian diaspora communities here in the United States, people who knew people who needed to come to safety. But we very shortly, within a matter of weeks, had 6,000 Americans who were asking about how they could sponsor and be connected with a Ukrainian who needed to come to safety. And that's when we started partnering with the private sector on building Welcome Connect, which is essentially a matching platform where American sponsors like Bryce and Maxine, who want to be a bridge to safety for someone who needs one, can connect with refugee newcomers who are looking for a way to come to safety.
So Bryce, how did you and Maxine first hear about Welcome? What was it about? Obviously, the world continues to have so many challenges. What was it about the crisis in Ukraine that caused you to respond?
Well, we woke up the morning of February 24th, like everybody else in the world, and discovered that the Soviet Union, that Russia had invaded Ukraine, and that all of a sudden there were 6 million Ukrainians displaced from their homes and in desperate need of help. And so we looked for ways to contribute through offering financial aid. I watched the papers and we thought about this in great depth. It happened that we had some facilities at home, which I'll talk about later, that provided us an opportunity to go into more intimate relationships with the Ukrainian people. And we saw on the news a clip about Welcome Connect. And we thought, well, there's actually an organization out there somewhere. So we went on the website, and sure enough, there was this wonderful organization that allowed us. They said they would allow us. We weren't quite on it yet, but that was going to offer us two-way communication. Wasn't going to cost us anything. Very easy. We looked through their website. They had questions that we should ask people that we wanted to sponsor on a daily basis, things that we could do on a weekly basis, things on a monthly basis. And we said, we looked at each other and said, let's do it. So we did.
Wow. Well, we'll come back to more about the family and kind of how that story has unfolded. Nazanin, I wonder if you could help us kind of rewind to the moment in time after Russia invades Ukraine and tell us about, what you had to do to get Welcome Connect off the ground.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, I think what we were seeing, in addition to so many Americans who wanted to help, is we were also seeing many Ukrainians who were seeking sponsors on places like Facebook or other places that were unprotected, really, and at a moment in their lives where they were deeply vulnerable. And so much of the motivation here was, is there a way that we could help Americans who, want to do this good work with Ukrainians who are seeking sponsors and do it in a way that's safe and that's protected? And what was really extraordinary is as we within Welcome.us were sort of contemplating this question, thinking about how we could take it on, we were approached by two engineers within Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, we're a public-private partnership. We work with government, we work with the private sector. We have 40 companies who sit on our CEO council, and they're very much a problem-solving partnership. They work with us on challenges that we need to solve. Goldman had partnered with us on launching a campaign to inform and empower Americans about the ability to sponsor. But because of this partnership, there were two engineers within Goldman. And what was remarkable about it is one was a Ukrainian American, one was a Russian American. They had each been resettled to the United States in the 1990s. They were seeing what was happening on Facebook and on the internet and all the sort of unsafe and unprotected ways that people were seeking sponsors. And so they came to us and they said, we have this partnership with you. Could we help solve this problem? And we said, well, that's great because we've been trying to figure out how to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. And that was the genesis of working with engineers from Goldman. And ultimately they brought in ServiceNow technology and working together to think about the design of a platform that would be safe and protected for both refugees and sponsors, that would provide refugees with tremendous agency at a time when so much had been taken away from them and they felt so deeply vulnerable. And that, that led to, the development of, this technology that has enabled tremendous human connections and a beautiful story that you'll all hear about.
One follow-up question on that is give us a sense of the scale of the problem and the time that was sort of the timeliness that was necessary to act, because I think one of the things that I've heard you say is that government alone can't solve all these problems.
Yes.
And in the amount of time you had to move, what did it take to make that happen?
Right. So the context for Welcome is we were launched in the crucible of the Afghan evacuation crisis, where the U.S. anticipated welcoming 80,000 Afghans on a government resettlement system that in the previous year had welcomed just 11,400 refugees. And our real premise was that if we mobilize the American people, that is how we would find the extra capacity and indeed the willingness and the commitment to help welcome many more newcomers. So, and we had tremendous outpouring of support with Afghan newcomers. And 6 months later, when Russia invaded Ukraine and the US government faced, how do we welcome Ukrainian newcomers on top of, the 80,000 Afghans that we're already welcoming? That's what's really broke open this innovation to allow for private community sponsorship, right? So the US government originally anticipated welcoming 10,000 Ukrainians. We thought with the outpouring of support that we'd seen for Afghans, that if we turned to the American people, we could welcome many more. And that's, that led to this sort of policy innovation around sponsorship and allowing Americans to privately sponsor refugee newcomers. But we did know that we needed to act so quickly. The Ukrainian displacement in Europe was the largest and fastest displacement of refugees since World War II. There were so many Ukrainians in need of safety, and we were already seeing so much vulnerability burgeoning on the web. So we wanted to do this very quickly. We wanted to capture the energy of Americans who wanted to help. We wanted to meet the urgent need of Ukrainians. And what was remarkable about this public-private partnership is, ServiceNow built this platform in 6 weeks. And they built it to be safe. They built it with simultaneous translation. They built it, if you think about all the complexities that go into it, where refugee newcomers at one of the most vulnerable points in their lives are seeking sponsors. And, Americans who, Bryce, as you describe, you were kind of like, is this real? Like, is this safe? Like, is this, is someone trying to fleece us? Or is this, is this an actual opportunity? There's so much that had to be built into it that was protected and safe and engaging and easy to use, because we wanted to unleash, the capacity of people in Unity, Wisconsin, all the way from, just everyone everywhere to be able to do this. And it's amazing the way it enabled Americans to participate in such a short amount of time. And again, by making it so easy to use. I love the fact that, you're in, rural Wisconsin, and it's as easy to use, as it is if you're in any city in the United States.
With any technology platform, especially something that facilitates a complex process.
Yes.
Lack of friction is the most important thing, right?
It's such a complex process. I mean, can you imagine making a decision as Bryce and Maxine did to sponsor a family, to take responsibility for a newcomer family coming to the United States, new culture, new language, resettling, rebuilding their lives. It's a tremendous responsibility. That sponsorship is the huge leap, it shouldn't be hard to, that part is hard. Making the connection.
If I could just interject here.
Please interject.
In our house, Max is the technician, and I'm often on the computer saying, what the heck am I supposed to do now? And she's always saying, well, it's intuitive, just do this, it's intuitive. Welcome Connect is actually intuitive. You can actually follow it through step by step. Even someone like me can do it. It's very easily done and well done, which I'll talk about later.
Well, that's perfect transition. So one of the things in Bryce's bio that we didn't mention is that he's also a movie star. He is the star of a documentary that we made and debuted last year at the Tribeca Film Festival called One Good Reason. And I'm going to just share a short clip from that film, which is the story of Bryce and Maxine welcoming a family into their home. Chris, if we could play the clip.
It's not something that you can even conceive of, but it's happening in the 21st century. You compare our home to the bombed out apartments in Ukraine, and we live in paradise.
Немає безпечного місця. Виживаєш. That's why we are here.
If we have the ability to share good fortune, it's really incumbent on us to do that. They said, yeah, we want to be sponsored.
Should we push the button?
The pictures with the tanks. That's what cinched it.
I thought, how could we make this work?
Дім – це твоя фортеця. Ми це відчуття загубили в Україні. Тут ми його знайшли.
Коли нам з мамою не страшно, то й тобі не має бути страшно. Ми з тобою.
You can think of 100 reasons not to do something, but there's usually one really good reason to do it.
Будемо їхати? Готовий?
And we gained new members to the family.
How many times have we seen this?
Still get choked up.
What's that?
I get choked up because Bryce gets choked up.
Right. Bryce, tell us a little bit more about the actual process. I mean, this is a huge step. You're considering bringing someone from halfway around the world into your home in rural Wisconsin, and you and Max sit down in front of the computer. What's that process like, both not just from a technical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint? What are you going through?
Yeah, well, of course, we wrestled with the idea, should we do something for probably a couple of weeks, and finally ran on to Welcome Connect and went onto the website, and there Welcome Connect suggests that you get a group of people, 5 or more people, I don't know if they give that number, but 5 or more people to come together and sponsor a family from Ukraine. Well, as you saw in the clip there, that brick house that the family is living in right now is the house that I grew up in on the farm. And it just happened that my mother had lived in that house. We have a house maybe 100 yards from there. And she had died a year prior. So the house was empty, and we had kept it warm, furnished, it was ready to go. And so we looked at each other and said, should we do this? So we went on to Welcome Connect. And the way it works is that they can see us, and the Ukrainians can see us, we can see them, or talk back and forth. So we put out our profile, we got some responses, we sorted through them, and decided this was the family that we wanted to sponsor. And that was pretty traumatic. We knew that we were taking a big step, and so we pushed the button and said, let's go with it. Knowing that we had a guideline that Welcome Connect had laid out for us. They're going to require that we do this, and everything was set. All we had to do was read it and get ready. And I must say that I often have an idea that we should do something, but Max is the one that does the work. And I think this was probably the case here too, that she was the one that grabbed the bull by the horn, so to speak, and went right on WhatsApp and started communicating back and forth with the Ukrainian family, the Hanachuks. And over that period of time, we immediately, once you decide you're going to sponsor, then the immigration department gives people a timeline that they can travel in. I think it's 90 days. That was in December, early December, and we wanted people to get over here and get out of there. It was dangerous. The picture that you saw of Roman there in front of a tank, that was their playground. So we wanted to get them out of there, and we said, and part of sponsorship is you have to provide the funding for this too. We said, buy your tickets and come on. Well, of course, we're saying that we don't realize that they are picking up their whole family. They are leaving their family and their lives behind. And so they said, no, we don't want to leave immediately. They had to, Alyssa said she had to get all her doctor papers in order, immigration papers. They had property they had to figure out what they were going to do with that. And so they said, we'll come at the end of January. So we made that arrangement. They paid for their own tickets. And on January 30th of 23, we met them at the O'Hare airport in Chicago, and here they came with, they had their two boys, 6 and 3 years old, and 4 pieces of luggage. And that was pretty basically what they were coming to a foreign country with. The next day we took them to the farm, and from there on the story continues. We had a lot of, I can't say that we had a lot of problems, but we had a lot of hurdles to overcome. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine taking your family, plopping them into a country where you don't really speak the language, speak a little bit, but not much. You don't have any idea what the infrastructure is there, what the school systems are, what the health insurance, what any of this is. Right. And there you are.
Right. Well, we'll come back to the challenges in a second. Nazanin, I wonder if you could help us to zoom out and kind of put the role of Welcome into context in the vast ecosystem and complexity of what has to happen between policy, government, private sector. I mean, Bryce touched on things like immigration. There are so many logistics to work through, and help us sort of understand how that system works.
I think it's a really remarkable model of how a public-private partnership can work. So we have a memorandum of understanding with the US government. We work in close coordination with the US government. As I mentioned, we were sort of at the table and helped design the policy innovations that led to, the Ukrainian sponsorship program. And then ultimately that led to, the success of that program resulted in an expansion of it to then being able to sponsor families from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And then now, in partnership with the Department of State, people can sponsor refugee newcomers from crises around the world through the Welcome Corps. So this sponsorship innovation that began with this policy innovation with the US government has now taken hold and expanded in so many different ways to be able to do, the sort of the public-private part of it, which is leverage the innovations of the private sector, the capacity of our American communities to then help welcome and resettle refugees coming in through these pathways. We work as the connector, the coordinator in partnership with the US government, but then also partnering with the private sector, convening and leveraging the private sector, convening and leveraging, informing, empowering American communities in now 11,000 zip codes across all 50 states to participate in welcoming. And it, sits alongside, a government infrastructure that, has, the U.S. government. The U.S. is the nation that welcomes the largest number of refugees in the world, and even so, it's welcomed on average annually for the last 30 years, 70,000 refugees a year, in the context of a global displacement crisis that is ever growing. And so we believe deeply that it's in the intersection of these kinds of public-private partnerships that we'll find the solutions to be able to help welcome many more. And I can say a little bit more about that.
I think we have on the next slide, just one up, Chris, some of the results. I think that the results kind of speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you could share with everybody what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
And then we'll
Well,
share
this
the before and after aspect of it.
Sure. What you're seeing here with the before and after, so we live in a context of a global displacement crisis that isn't going away, right? It's amplified by ongoing conflicts and crises and by the climate crisis. So we're in an era of an ever-increasing need to help welcome and resettle newcomers productively. People are on the move. And, with the privilege of having worked in some of the best humanitarian response organizations and within the US government, we would say that the solutions aren't going to come from government alone. They're constrained by capacity, they're constrained by resources, they're constrained by politics. You wouldn't imagine in the national politics that we all know that Congress is going to double or triple or quadruple appropriations for welcoming refugee newcomers in need of safety. But what we're finding is that the American people will. And so with these policy innovations, just over the last 22 months, Americans have sponsored nearly 500,000 refugee newcomers to come to the United States. Compare that to the average I was just sharing with you, that on average, US government systems alone have welcomed 70,000 refugee newcomers annually for the last 30 years. That's getting better all the time, but still, it's not going to be able to meet demand, government systems working alone. But what we've found is this tremendous capacity, people all over the country, from every corner of our American tapestry, our diaspora communities, our faith communities, our national service organizations, Lions and Rotary clubs, they come into this work through the side door of service, this opportunity to help. And with government partners opening the door through their policy innovations, the private sector and American communities have rushed right in. So what you see in the map on the left here is what our government systems can do alone. These are our refugee resettlement organizations like the International Rescue Committee and where they operate all across the United States. And you see so much white space, like so much untapped capacity. And the map on the right is what we see now, 22 months after these innovations were introduced. And that's, sponsors everywhere across the United States in 11,000 zip codes in all 50 states. So it's a tremendous testament to what happens when we break open this problem solving to involve our American communities and to involve our American private sector.
Amazing results. I mean, that's in the world of marketing that I live in, a before and after slide is the most compelling thing you can have, and that is definitely a slide that says 1,000 words.
I think the most important thing, though, is to give that credit right back to the U.S. government for these policy innovations, to the private sector for how they built the infrastructure alongside us, and most of all, to people like Bryce and Maxine, who are the folks who, those pink dots are enabled by people like Bryce and Maxine, and the partnership with the private sector to make it easier for them to participate in the policy innovations of the U.S. government.
Right.
It takes all of it, but that's what's possible when it comes together.
That's a nice transition back to, I think, what we're trying to help people understand is kind of the macro and the micro, if you will, or the story of the whole system, and then the story of one family coming to live with one family. So when you talked about the arrival at O'Hare Airport, then you come back to the farm and settle in a little bit. What are sort of the typical challenges that you faced in those early days?
Yeah, I think the challenges can be divided into two different parts. One is the immediate challenge of here's a family coming in, just in out of the cold, and without knowledge of anything. Alyssa had told us that they had been looking for a family that would really care for their children. And we've got 10 grandchildren, so I guess she figured that was the ticket, which
you knew what
she
you were
asked
doing.
us, right? But the immediate problem is make them welcome, make them feel welcome. And we had a neighbor that had provided a dinner that had put it in the refrigerator for them. Our daughter had come and had decorated the house. And so when they moved into the house, we tried to make them feel that they were in a warm, welcoming place. Then on top of that is the more technical, bureaucratic problems that they're going to run into. A driver's license, they get a car. I made a whole list of them here. Their Social Security, the
Health insurance.
Go to school,
Yeah.
health care, fuel assistance, you name it. And these people were in need of it. And how do you connect them? Well, fortunately, they had Max pretty basically acting as the number one advocate for them. And Alyssa and Mikola. Alyssa is the woman, Mikola is the husband, and Roman and Dimitro are the two boys. Alyssa got to the point where people would say, well, do you need an interpreter? And then she'd say, no, I've got Max. So those are some of the problems, or some of the hurdles that we had to overcome. The rewards of that are, the long-term rewards of that are that now you see this family is becoming much more independent. If you watch the whole clip, you'll see a little boy just crying and carrying on about going to school. And of course, he goes to a school where he can't understand a single word, and nobody there can understand him. And at one point, he's telling his mother, I hate you, Mom. Because Alicia had the good sense to make sure that those boys were in school. Now we'll see a knock on our door, and here's Roman with his spelling, daily spelling list, where he gets a 10 out of 10 the first thing he wants to do is show it to us and brag about it. He's got friends in school. He wants to go to school. He's having a good time, and he's learning English, and as they are also. I would just add this caveat that the reason that Welcome Connect says that you should have more than one sponsor is because you have some real expenses. You have to provide housing, you have to provide transportation. It just happened that we had a house, and it also just happened that we had an extra car. So we were in a kind of a unique situation. But, and as it developed, we had a lot of help. So those are some of the problems and the triumphs. You know, when I sit and look out my window and see these two little boys playing out in the yard, nice big green yard, and I think of them back in Ukraine, where they're running for shelter when the bombs come in. And when they do go outside, they're in front of armored tanks.
Really? That's pretty rewarding. That's pretty rewarding. Amazing. Well, we can't thank you enough, Bryce and Max. Naz, you've had such a long sort of storied career in government and state departments. How have all of those experiences led up to this for you in terms of just how you think about the future of Welcome and how important it is?
I kind of think Bryce just said it all.
What's that?
I think you just said it all. Like, I think we need better solutions for welcoming newcomers at scale. We know that when it's done well, which is to say that when people are able to come in a way that's safe and that's orderly and that's authorized, where they have status and they have work authorization and they have a little bit of support, we know that it is a huge win-win, both for those refugee newcomers, but even more so for our communities and for our country.
Yeah.
And you see that in what Bryce is expressing. One of the things that I am so moved by with the sponsors that we're privileged to engage with is that they're so often talking about how they are transformed by the experience and what the experience means to them. I'm part of a sponsor group that started as a group of 5 and is now a group of 40. And the stories that get told in that sponsorship group are about sponsors' own experiences, how great it was to see kids playing on the swing sets that their kids used to play on, how inspired they are by the resilience and the commitment of families who are rebuilding their lives here, how inspired they are by the opportunity to extend the ideals of who we are as a country to the next generation of new Americans who are seeking that opportunity. I think there's so much potential there. And I think it's so interesting that Bryce, you say you just happen to have a home and you just happen to have a car. But look at all the dots on that map. And what that means is if you give Americans an opportunity to be part of solving this problem, they will solve it any which way they can. They will find a way because they're committed to doing it. And it just taps into so much more power and potential and commitment that we have as a country to welcome.
Yes.
We're so aware of the toxicity of our national politics. And so you should take away from this session, oh my gosh, that people in every corner of the country are actually doing this work. They're doing this work, they're doing it every day. Mm-hmm. And they're proving the best of who we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to come back to the story of Bryce and Maxine for a second, and hopefully you'll all go later on and watch the film One Good Reason, and you'll spend a little bit more time with them. But one of the things that is kind of amazing, kind of kismet, kind of, you know, call it what you will, Bryce and Maxine live in Unity, Wisconsin. Of all the towns they could live in. And it's very interesting when Bryce talks about the family coming from Ukraine, you think, okay, they're being displaced in every possible way. Well, one of the ways that you might not expect is that they're coming from Lviv, which is a very large city. And they're coming to live in a town of 484 or something like that. Yeah. A town of 400 in rural Wisconsin. And so I'm very curious how the town of Unity responded. How did you feel the support of your neighbors?
Yeah, you know, first of all, how did they respond? I warned them before when we said that we would sponsor them. You're coming from a city of 700,000 people to a community of 400, and we live 6 miles from that community. We're out in the country. So very, very different. They said, go ahead. And we didn't have really any idea how the community would react to that. And quite frankly, had not even given it a thought of how they would react. But as soon as people heard that we were doing this, they wanted to help. And I heard more than once, well, yeah, you know how to do that. You know how to do something like this, so you could go ahead and do it. And we would always tell them, go to Welcome Connect. Get a group together. You can do this, same thing. Well, of course, everybody isn't going to go to Welcome Connect and do that. They wanted to help right now. They knew that here was a situation. So we had people, Max actually went to a GoFundMe page, which Welcome Connect suggests that you do. And because they were offering, you know, can we give them money? Do they need clothes? So what do they need? Well, it didn't take long for them to have too many clothes that donated for the boys and for themselves. So then we would say, give money. Well, how do you give money? Welcome Connect or GoFundMe. And it was overwhelming. The response, I forget, several $1,000s was given in a hurry. One of our neighbors brought up, I think it was $300 and some venison sausage, and he went home and he called us, or we called them, and he said, is there any other way that we could help? And Max said, well, you know, we've got one car, but if you know of somebody that has a car for sale, we need a second car for them to go to work. He said, I've got a car, I'll give it to them. And sure enough, here's this Chrysler something or another, I forget what it is, but it's a very nice car. It's 20 years old, but it runs like a top, and he drives it to work every day. And he just gave him that car, no strings attached. We had people, we had several church groups wanted to get together a giving program, and then they would collect it at church and just write one check to the GoFundMe page. I would imagine that probably a couple hundred people in the community contributed to this project at home. And I don't want to leave out our family. Our family welcomed these folks with open arms. And quite frankly, Makola and Alyssa are the same age as our children. They're in their 40s. And, you know, they're not quite our daughter and son-in-law or son and daughter-in-law, but pretty close. The kids now, come over, they'll see them knocking on the door, they want a banana, they want to do this, they want to come out and play. We trade dinners. We had Christmas dinner. They were invited to our Christmas dinner. To our Thanksgiving, they had never had a Thanksgiving before. Alyssa took a picture of the turkey, said she'd never seen anything like that before. And and I guess along with this story is that it's not just us giving them. It is a two-way street. And we gained so much from the Hedettrick family. Little things like cultural trades. But I mean, these are just great people. They're just wonderful people.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, before we wrap up, and we'll try to save a minute for any questions from you all, I just wanted to ask you both kind of what it is that you feel drives you to be a part of this. For you, Nazanin, you very much drive this program as the CEO. What is it about your personal story, about your life, history, and experience that makes this so important as the work you do?
From a personal perspective, I feel like I very much feel like my life is representative of those accidents of timing and geography that made it possible for me to achieve my human potential and to make my contributions. My parents were exchange students from Iran. They were here in the US. They were studying, intending to go back to Iran. I was born here accidentally. They were supposed to wait until their studies were finished before they had kids, but I was an accident. And then the Iranian Revolution happened in the last year of my dad's PhD program. And so because they had me and because of so much uncertainty in Iran, they decided to stay. And I think if you look at what's happening with women in Iran today, you know how different my trajectory would be if not for that accident of timing and geography. And so it's motivated career choices that have, that allow me to work in ways that help remove barriers for people to achieve their human potential, and particularly in this area of displacement. I think when you're displaced, it's sort of ground zero for denial of human rights and denial of your ability to achieve your human potential through no cause of your own. And having seen sort of, again, being privileged to work in so many different ways of coming at the problem, feeling very strongly that the solution lies in our American communities and in a partnership with government, not exclusively with government. I think the last reason is, again, everything you hear from Bryce and from Max. Like we were the first nation with a constitution that conferred human rights and human dignity on the basis of personhood and not on the basis of citizenship. And it's why, why I and my family were able to rebuild our lives here. It's why somewhere in so many of our histories, our families were able to rebuild their lives here. And there are many imperfections in that Constitution and in the way that it's been implemented and deployed throughout our history. But it has been the work of our very diverse American communities that have made it better over time. And so I come to it with a deep belief and a real patriotism in who we are when we are the best of ourselves, and a deep belief and real faith. And I take real inspiration from what our communities are willing to do. It's what Tocqueville wrote about us, like we serve, we solve problems. And I think if we're giving that opportunity to be the best of ourselves to American communities, it's gonna help us solve one of the most intractable challenges of our time.
Bryce, is there anything that you'd like to add from your experience?
I think I can wrap it up pretty briefly as to what motivated us. in that Max and I have always tried to teach our kids that when you see somebody that needs help, you give it. And if you have the resources to help them, you provide those resources. And that's it's one thing to say it, it's quite another thing to do it. And we've always tried to teach them by example.
Beautifully said. Teaching everyone by example, for sure. And I think all of us can learn a lot from the example of Bryce and Max. I mean that. Chris, would you just go to the last slide for me here? This is just I wanted to give everyone a chance to capture any way that you want to help, call to action. There obviously are ways to donate and support Welcome US, the Welcome platform. You can also become a sponsor yourself. Please, share the story that you heard today. Tell family and friends, and if you think you know someone who might be interested, tell them about going to welcome.us. And finally, to see more of Bryce and Maxine's story, go to YouTube and watch One Good Reason. It's if you just go to servicenow.com/onegoodreason or look up One Good Reason, you should find it. It is a 30-minute documentary that features Bryce, Maxine, and the family that they host. And it's now been screened by over 350,000 people. So we created it to try to spread the word of this story and to try to spread the example of Bryce and Maxine. And so if you enjoy it, please share it on and tell someone else about it, and it'll help Welcome Connect to reach more people. So let's see if there are any questions from anyone in the audience.
Thank you so much, Bryce, Naz, and Jim, for sharing your story. And I can't wait to check out One Good Reason later. Naz, you had mentioned earlier that it took ServiceNow 6 weeks to build the platform. So I have a two-part question on that for both yourself and Jim. How are your organizations able to act with such speed? And were there any logistical challenges you faced that were unexpected?
Go ahead, you start.
I think a big part of the way we were able to act with such speed was one, tremendous commitment, right? So urgency of the challenge and having partners who really felt that urgency and, because of the nature of the crisis, and then who had the technology and the innovation and the resources to get it done. I think that, and being able to, so we didn't have to work through a lot of red tape. It was like, we have a problem to solve. We have, the technological innovations to do it, and we've got committed partners, and we're going to go at the challenge until we get it right. And I'd say we also launched with, we launched with we couldn't make perfect the enemy of the good. Like, there was nothing perfect that was happening about what was going on with people who were experiencing this extraordinary crisis. So it was kind of like, okay, let's launch, let's iterate, let's launch, let's iterate. And then having partners who were willing to do that iteration with us. Mm-hmm. But maybe one more thing, working really, it was such a collaborative partnership because, again, I'll just go back to real safety concerns, real protection concerns. And so just aligning on those principles and aligning on the urgency, and then letting people express their comparative advantages. I wouldn't know the first thing about the technology, but we could describe for you what it needed to be able to do. And it was your engineers that, could respond to that.
Sure. It's a great question, because I think in many ways, I think it's the engineering example of what Bryce and Maxine represent, meaning the best of humanity coming forward. And so everyone who was asked, do you have time to help, said, I will clear everything off of my calendar and do my work on the weekend to make this happen. Every engineer, every technician, every solution consultant, people raised their hands and said, I'll be there first thing tomorrow morning, where do you need me? And I think especially heartening for me was just getting to know some of the engineers. In many ways, we made the film as kind of honestly kind of a tribute to all of the engineers who were involved in making this, because in the engineering mind, the constraint is just a problem to solve. And the constraint was insane complexity in a very short period of time. It had to be working in 6 weeks because there were millions of people without homes. And so they looked at that and said, how are we going to solve it? The world's best engineers from Goldman Sachs said there's only one way to do it. We can build it on this platform, the ServiceNow platform. The engineers from ServiceNow got in a room with them and they just did it. And I think it's just a real tribute to kind of when people say we can do it, they get it done.
Thank you, Bryce and Max, for opening your homes and your hearts and sharing your stories. And, I really do think that you represent the best of America, and this platform represents like the best of public-private partnerships. And my question is, we are seeing rising authoritarianism in our political system, and we are seeing rising hate in our communities. We are not guaranteed a government that has policies that are welcoming. And my question is, how do we shift models, expand on models on the structure side to ensure that we can still create a welcoming environment, regardless of 5, 10, 20 years down the line, what our government looks like? And then also from your experience, Bryce and Max, like how do we take lessons learned from your experience with your community to, on the culture side of things, continue to expand that welcoming community kind of at the ground level?
Right, thank you. Do you want to take the second part first, Brian?
Well, I think in our case, we're fairly well known in our community. We're going to celebrate our 122nd year of owning the farm here in April. So we've been there for a while. And I think when people see that what we've done, we're hoping that they'll try to emulate that and understand that. So I think that's the example that we're trying to put out.
I think it's such an important question. I'm really, really glad that you asked it. And you're kind of pointing at the secret strategy here, right? Which is the more Americans who get involved in this work, the more we're gonna rebuild our commitment and rebuild our ties to welcoming. So what we find that's happening through the sponsorship model is different from communities feeling like something's being imposed on them. It's their neighbors who are stepping up to do this work. It's people they know who are stepping up to welcome. And then they're spreading the word in the community and more people are getting involved. And our strategy here is grounded in contact theory. Again, this idea that welcomers are gonna be as transformed by the experience as the people they welcome. And that the more folks who do this, the more they're transformed by the experience, the more they're committed and willing and wanting and spreading the word about how to do more of it. I do think that what that means is, so I'll give you an example. For everyone who sponsors, they're learning what it's like to be a newcomer in this country. They're learning the ways that our government makes it easy or not easy for that to happen. Don't get me wrong, we rely on government policy. It's the US government that opened these pathways now for refugees from all over the world to be able to come through sponsorship. They conduct the security and the background checks. If there's a decision to shut those programs down, that'll be hugely impactful. But now you've got, millions of people across the country who've been touched by this, who are personally engaged with newcomers and are their defenders and their advocates and are inspired by what our communities have and want to give. And I'm pretty sure that they would feel like they need to say something about that, about their right to welcome, about their ability to welcome and their willingness to do it. We have states who have refused participation in the federal refugee resettlement program, but there's churches in those same states who are sponsoring, and nobody can get in their way, And so it's building a new political constituency and a cross-divide one. It's people from every party, every background, and they are all doing this welcoming work, and they are inspired by being able to do it. And that's our hope for being able to build a durable commitment to welcoming that's going to withstand whatever's happening in our national politics.
Beautifully said, and a perfect way to wrap up. Thank you, Naz. Bryce, thank you for sharing your story. Naz, thank you. And thank you, South by Southwest, for hosting us. So appreciate it.
Thank you all for choosing us. You have so many amazing sessions to go to. Thank you all
Yes.
so much for being here.
Yeah,
Thank you to
I would
Bryce
say
and
this, I'll volunteer for Max, that she and I will be around here for a little bit if anybody wants to talk.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Bryce.
Thank you.
All right.